Jasmine Amy Rogers shines in what is probably the most pleasant surprise I've seen on Broadway in quite some time. Boop the musical. Wait, just a second here. Oh, that's better. My name is Ben Daniels, and I love talking about theater, movies, especially of the camp variety, music, and all things queer media. I did a little theater weekend in New York where I saw a bunch of different shows. Considering I am reviewing these in the order in which I viewed them, I have already reviewed Sunset Boulevard and Gypsy, link to those right here, and now I will be sharing my thoughts on what was a last-minute watch for me, Boop the Musical. Yes, whether you're a cartoon nerd or not, I'm sure you scoffed at the announcement of this project. I know I did, admittedly. But with that remained an air of curiosity. Why Betty Boop of all characters? And how would they translate a character like her to the stage? I'm happy to say that this completely defied all expectations, which admittedly were not very high, but it's still impressive. Boop the Musical is a musical which, surprisingly enough, stays true to the roots of this character, with a surprising attention to detail on the part of the creative crew, who must have done a lot of research if they weren't already fans to begin with. They knew exactly what they were doing here. And Jasmine Amy Rogers makes a brilliant Broadway debut in the starring role as Betty Boop, and she captures the character perfectly. She is Betty Boop. I really cannot think of any other Broadway show that surprised me quite like this one. From the big, lavish musical numbers, to the stunning costumes and choreography, to the ambitious set design, I really had a blast watching this. And you know I am a cartoon nerd, like I am probably the toughest critic of a show like this. And it's not without its flaws, sure, but these flaws in the grand scheme of things hardly detract from what is a lovely evening of theater. So a little overview. Boop the Musical follows the iconic Betty Boop, who really just wants a day off. In this reality, I guess she's still making cartoons in 2025. Yeah, don't read too into the story. Anyway, she uses one of Grampy's inventions to take her to the real world, where she is dropped into New York Comic-Con. And as she discovers this new world, she learns about who she is deep down, rather than what we all know her as. It's an interesting concept, very Barbie, and as I will go more into in a minute, that works very well for this character. The first person she meets is a man named Dwayne, which I'm sure you can expect where that's going. But more unexpectedly, she meets this Betty Boop ultra fan kid named Trisha, and Trisha's foster mother is helping this New York mayoral candidate out in an upcoming election, so they kind of get roped into this whole political thing as well. Meanwhile, Grampy goes into the real world to find Betty and meets an old flame from decades ago, and I'm sure you can tell where that's going as well. I'm trying to be vague here because this is a new musical that no one really knows anything about, and I'm trying to keep that element of surprise intact because it really was that. The surprise I felt in that theater. I surprised as well by the cleverness of that narrative that I found so delightful with my time watching Boop the Musical. But before we move on, as is I guess a new tradition now, let's talk about your experience that you will be having in the theater watching Boop the Musical. Boop the Musical is performing at the Broadhurst Theater in New York at 1,156 seats. This is on the smaller end of Broadway theaters. I didn't get footage of it walking in, but going into the auditorium itself, you will be greeted to a bunch of cool merch. I was sitting in the right mezzanine, row D, seat 4. The view was excellent. I got a full view of the stage and did not need to push myself to the edge of my seat thanks to the proper rake in this theater. The stage itself was a cool setup. As you can see, there are images of other Fleischer characters like Coco the Clown, and the backdrop is bright and bold, a wonderful little glimpse into what to expect with this show. I will further add my disappointment with the theater staff who let in a bunch of latecomers in the middle of the opening number. That was extremely frustrating, and yes, they did block a lot of the stage during that number. I was very disappointed in that. Just a reminder to please not show up late to the theater. It is very rude to everyone around you and rude to the theater staff. Let's talk about the script and the score. The book is written by Bob Martin, a Canadian actually, known for his work in Second City in my hometown, Toronto. The writing in this production makes a lot more sense knowing this guy's background. Obviously, he has a knack for improv comedy, and I feel that improvisational spirit in the script, which I know sounds like an oxymoron because while there is no improv comedy in the show itself, I'm more so talking about the comedic style and the timing in the script. That silliness, that unexpectedness silliness that you see a lot in improv comedy is very prevalent here. Carries the vibe of being improv comedy without actually being improv comedy. Now, you can call this clever writing, or you can say he improv'd his way through the script, suggesting laziness. I would not agree on the latter, but on the other hand, I would understand where you're coming from. For the most part, I think this is a very funny, smart, well-written script. It feels very authentically Betty Boop. Surprisingly so. As I've said before, you can really tell that the creative crew either did their research or were already fans of Betty Boop to begin with, because this really feels like a love letter not just to the character but to the world of Fleischer as a whole. One of the biggest reasons for that would have to be in the world building in this show. So when Betty is not in New York, she is living in Toontown, a completely black and white world, where she lives with her grampy and films shorts, and that's basically her day-to-day. From the beautifully animated digital backgrounds, to the costumes, to the smart dialogue, and the movements and the timing of the actors, this is a cartoon world through and through. The characters living here are very much classic film-esque. The standouts being these two directors who themselves go through a very strange arc that I didn't quite understand, but that's for the spoiler section. But I think they do an excellent job at fleshing this world out and making it pertain to Betty Boop as a character, and really staying true to that character, her style, and her legacy. Her love interest in the real world is a jazz musician. That alone is really clever when you consider the score of hers and other Fleischer shorts. But more specifically, her persona and jazz are practically synonymous with each other thanks to these scores, which were primarily written by Sammy Timberg or Johnny Green. And that's not even beginning to mention the contributions of Lou Fleischer, Max Fleischer's brother. Why am I telling you this? Because the scores for these shorts are as iconic as the shorts themselves. And the creative crew here clearly knows this, and they pay homage to that in beautifully subtle ways, like having this love interest be a jazz musician. I thought that was very lovely to see, and I love how they stay true to the character and her roots by not shying away from the fact that back in the day, she was a sex symbol. Even the fabulous opening number, Have a Little Versatility, in which she's filming a short with a song title like that, they knew exactly what they were doing. I'm just saying. I like how they translate that sex symbol legacy into the real world. I will go more into that in the spoiler section, but I think for the most part what they do is quite interesting, even if it is a little cringe. It's not that the idea itself isn't interesting. I would say it's more the execution of that idea that needs a little bit of work that I think may have been mismanaged. On that topic, I'll add that I'm glad they didn't age this down too much, making it too child-friendly. I'm not saying don't bring your kid. In fact, this is a really, really good option for families. But it deals with some of the adult themes and ideas that the Betty Boop cartoons back in the day never shied away from. Keep in mind, those cartoons were never meant for children. So I'm glad that even though this is aged down a little bit so that it can be family friendly, they didn't go too far with it. I think they really stay true to the character's edginess. And I'm probably going to end up being the only theater critic to bring up this extremely tiny detail, but I appreciate that the writers have enough respect for these animated shorts to actually call them animated shorts in the script, rather than refer to them as cartoons unless that's being said by someone who's ignorant about all this. Many animation aficionados find referring to them simply as cartoons to be belittling of the work. It can have a negative connotation to it, and I'm very surprised that this team was on top of that, intentionally or not. I loved the constant references to Betty Boop and the Fleischer canon. I do wish there were more on-stage cameos of other Fleischer characters, maybe ensemble members on stage dressed as Bimbo or Coco the Clown, maybe even having them walk around the set during those filming scenes. It could add so much life to those scenes, but at the same time, I don't think liveliness was what they were going for here. It looks like during these black and white Toontown world scenes, they were going more for stiffness, kind of paying homage to how these characters move in animated shorts of the era, so to then contrast it with the excess of the real world. But that is a more minor critique amidst the more glaring problems with this show. So the story is clever, they pay proper homage to the character and the Fleischer characters as a whole. But on the other hand, if you think about the story for more than 2 seconds, it starts to fall apart. Many would compare this to Barbie, but I don't really see anything wrong with that. Yes, they are very similar in a lot of ways, but you know what? I like seeing that story done through a cartoon character's perspective. I'm not saying we've never seen cartoon characters in the real world before in media, because believe me, we have, but never done in a way that examines who the character is or was, and what they represent in society. And if that has already been done, I can't really think of any other examples in which that has been done well. But that does lead me into a problem that I do have with this story, which does require me to acknowledge a pretty big elephant in the room. And this is not me trying to hate on Fleischer or his shorts. I love them dearly. But Betty Boop is not as popular as she was. It's entirely possible for much of today's generation to not even know who Betty Boop is. They haven't really done anything with the character in years outside of this production. So with this knowledge going in, I start asking myself, why is she filming shorts in 2025? I haven't seen any Betty Boop shorts produced in decades. They stopped making Betty Boop shorts long before I was born. I believe they suggest that they're filmed for some alternate reality, which we know nothing about, nor do we understand anything about how that distribution process works. And if I'm going deeper with it, am I really to believe that there exists a Gen Z child in this world who not only knows who Betty Boop is, but is actually a super fan of her work? I would have been very intrigued to see how Betty Boop would fare in a world where people maybe don't remember who she is. Like, who is this crazy woman roaming our streets in a 20s flapper dress? She could be treated as a fugitive. I feel like even one small reference to this, like when the news breaks out that Betty Boop is in the real world, I would have fallen out of my seat laughing if, amid all the chaos, some random member of the ensemble would just be like, who the hell's Betty Boop? I think even a small reference like that would have made a really big difference to acknowledge that, okay, she's not as big as she was, but she's not completely forgotten either. I also think that the show gets weirdly political later on in the show. Not that there's anything wrong with politics in theater, but they don't really say anything bold with it. I mean, I guess they make a respectable enough statement, but it comes off rather spoon-fed, and I don't know, I guess it just felt out of place. I'll go more into that in the spoiler section, but ultimately, story-wise, don't think about it too much, and I can assure you, you will have a wonderful time with this. Moving on to the score, this production has music composed by David Foster, another Canadian and 16-time Grammy Award winner, and lyrics written by Susan Birkenhead. It's an excellent score, definitely one of the best I've heard in a new show this decade so far. I love the opening number, A Little Versatility. I thought it was so upbeat, so fun, and a great way to summarize Betty Boop's character. And the choreography in that number is spectacular. Within 30 seconds, I was hooked. I was into this. I was invested, and I had a big, stupid smile on my face. Overall, I especially love Betty Boop's solo numbers and the ensemble numbers. As Jasmine Amy Rogers is becoming Betty Boop, she does that even in the voice, doing a fantastic job translating Betty Boop's voice to the stage, while still staying true to the essence of that voice. Other song highlights for me were Ordinary Day, which is a Betty Boop solo number, I Speak Jazz, which is sung by Dwayne with the ensemble. My New York was a great ensemble song and dance number. In Color was a very interesting character-driven song. Where I Wanna Be was an excellent way to finish Act 1, but perhaps the most pleasing to me would have to be Where's Betty, the second act opening number. A big ensemble number that made my jaw drop, and I will explain why later. Why Look Around the Corner is a very sweet love song, and I love the various homages in that number. It's a very classically Broadway song, which I wholly appreciated. Something to shout about is Betty's final belty number, another highlight of the evening. The big final ensemble number, The Color of Love, was beautiful. And the title of that song sounds like something Celine Dion would sing, and that made me chuckle. But all around, I was pleasantly surprised by the score. Very much so. The numbers are very big Broadway, and they are so unique, especially in their staging with many of them. They cleverly play with black and white and color in so many unique ways. And the music itself is very catchy and memorable, which is all a good transition into our next section, staging and direction. easily the most impressive aspects of the staging and direction of this show come from the way they play with color. Bouncing between the black and white Fleischer world and real world New York is endlessly clever. It never grows tired. They always find ways to keep you surprised and engaged. It was delightful to watch from the very moment they introduced color in this show as Betty Boop was first traveling across realities, which again, I will talk about more in the spoilers, to the second act opener, which came completely by surprise for me and was probably one of the best second act openers I've ever seen. There are so many ideas at play here, and I love how ambitious they get with the staging and the sets and the choreography. Speaking of the sets, I thought the set design and overall production value was vibrantly colorful and lively. To compare the visual style to something contemporary, this would probably be as if the art direction of La La Land was adapted to the stage. It's very classically and excessively filmic. Technicolor brilliance. You can tell that this is pulling from the same sources as La La Land, Singing in the Rain, An American in Paris, The Wizard of Oz. Inspiration from theatrical productions. The costumes are very streamlined in their color, akin to the 2017 production of Hello Dolly. Set-wise, it's very 2022 Company, just those eye-popping neon colors. You could even say it has the vibrancy of animated shorts during the in-between era of black and white and color, where they were really experimenting and showing the world how many bright colors can be produced on screen at once. Back when color and film used to be fun. A lot of the set is digital backgrounds, which I know a lot of people don't like, but I thought it was absolutely essential here. I wish they left a little more practical sets for the foreground. I recall a scene taking place in an office, and I think there was too much set in the background, and I think it overall would have looked nicer if there was perhaps a stronger blend between the practical and the digital. I wish they used more physical sets in those types of scenes. But the backgrounds are extremely well animated, and yes, there is a lot of classic style hand-drawn animation at play here, which I adored every second of. The set design, the show as a whole, is a treat for animation aficionados. They would be the first audience I recommend this to. There's even a little bit of illusionary theater at play here, particularly with a breakfast scene between Betty and Grampy early on in the show. It was really cool and, again, unexpected. And having just seen Sunset Boulevard a couple days prior, it was interesting to see how they made this show look black and white in contrast to how they made Sunset Boulevard look black and white. There are actual sets here, very elaborate sets I might add, that are painted in black and white and designed as if they belong in a 30s black and white animated short with a real eye for that sensibility. Detailed costumes, hair and makeup, and lighting that are also black and white. To go into a bit more detail with the costumes, early on in the show, it's more of the same. It's all black and white, and it's very of the time period, which I love. Those outfits felt very late 20s to 30s. But when they get into the real world and everything becomes color, the costuming becomes a burst of Technicolor, candy-coated theatrical magic. Jasmine's costumes are especially glamorous. Even the costumes for the ensemble become a lot more sequined, a lot more glam, brighter, and more vivid as the show continues. It's a feast for the eyes. As mentioned before, the costumes in this did remind me a lot of the costumes in the 2017 production of Hello Dolly when it comes to those vibrant colors. I was surprised to see that within costume designer Greg Barnes's impressive credits, Hello Dolly was not in there, but you can definitely see hints of Some Like It Hot and Kinky Boots in there, which are also shows that he has worked on. Although associate costume designer Matthew Pachtman did in fact work on that 2017 revival of Hello Dolly in that same associate role, so he is absolutely getting a shout out here. I also do need to take a moment to discuss the choreography in this show. That work was done by Jerry Mitchell, and the end result is stunning, very classic Broadway. It's not a huge ensemble by any means, but they fill the stage pretty well and create some really brilliant dance numbers with the somewhat smaller stage that they're working with. It never feels overwhelming or messy. The space is utilized to its fullest. Jerry Mitchell also directed the entire show, an impressive feat to do both, and I think he pulled it off brilliantly. From the big dance numbers to the smaller, more intimate moments, I think he has a very tonally versatile eye that really shows through in this production, while keeping it lighthearted with just the right amount of camp. He gives the care and attention that an iconic character like Betty Boop deserves, as the rest of the creative crew has. Now, let's talk about the performances. I'll say right off the bat that this is Jasmine's show. Yes, what you have been hearing about her in the show is absolutely correct. Jasmine Amy Rogers is more than a star in the making. She is a star right here, right now. She is Betty Boop. I was watching her surprised that this was her Broadway debut. You would think that she was on the Broadway stage for years. From building her many solos to her excellent comedic timing, she is fantastic all around. She personifies Betty Boop in ways that I did not expect seeing on stage in such intricate detail. Every movement, every sound she makes is classically Betty Boop as we know and love her. She speaks with warmth and attitude. She does the boop boop be-doo. Even when she's simply walking, you can see so much of Betty in every step. I can sing Jasmine's praises for hours. She was perfect for this role. I would argue maybe the role she was born to play. She has never outright said that, so perhaps I shouldn't assume that that's how she's thinking of it, but she puts so much care into staying true to this character. You can tell that she at the very least did a lot of research. I'm glad they casted a Black woman in the role, as Betty Boop from her very conception has Black roots, having been heavily inspired by Black jazz singer Esther Jones. By the way, yet another poignant relation to jazz, which is lovingly paid homage to in this production. So this is more than just DEI casting. This is casting that matters on the stage and to the very essence of this character. Again, the creatives knew what they were doing here, as did Jasmine in this role. So when we're looking at this character whose style was essentially appropriated by a Black performer, I think there's a lot of power in this casting choice, while also staying true to the character's roots but not shying away from it, but rather switching up the context of it. I think that's really cool to see. Grampy is played by Stephen DeRosa, who gives a perfectly humorous performance. I think he was definitely one of the highlights of this show. I loved his relationship with Betty. I thought they had fantastic chemistry on stage. And I think he also had great chemistry with Valentina, who we will be talking about in a minute. But overall, he really plays up the silliness. He really plays up the humor and the warmth of this character. It was all around great to see. Dwayne is played by Ainsley Melham in what is his first major Broadway role, and he also gives a great performance here. He's a talented singer, he plays up the charm, he plays up the charisma, and if that was actually him playing on stage rather than a dub done by the orchestra, he is also very talented instrumentally. Some of the story choices for this character are a little weird, but he plays them sincerely, which is commendable. Trisha is played by Angelica Hale in what is her Broadway debut as well, giving a really sweet performance as this Betty Boop superfan. She plays up the fangirl persona while also remaining very vulnerable and emotionally available to Betty when she needs to be, and that's done in a very wholesome way. She's also pretty funny with great comedic timing. Major applause for her, especially considering this is her first role. She's very talented, and I hope she sees a bright future in the theater. Valentina is played by Faith Prince, and Valentina's an interesting character. I think Faith really captures the eccentricity of the character very well, as Stephen captured the eccentricity of Grampy, and the two of them have great on-stage chemistry. Her character is a bit weird, but Valentina was kind of a standout to me. I just can't not enjoy seeing an older diva on stage belting her lungs out. And A Cure for Love was a really cool number. Raymond is played by Eric Bergen, giving a great performance as the show's antagonist. He plays up the silliness and he isn't afraid to get a little camp with it. He's scummy, he's charismatic, he behaves as any male politician does. Now, I've been waiting for this section to bring this up because this is as much of a performance as any of the actors on stage. But Betty's dog Pudgy is also in the show, puppeteered by Philip Huber in what is also his Broadway debut. I find puppeteers on Broadway often go unappreciated, so it's really worth pointing out. The puppeteering work here was fantastic. This guy is super talented. It's just very cute. And yes, Pudgy does join in this multiversal escapade, so he is in it quite a bit. So more puppeteering on Broadway, please. Now, as I go into spoilers, if you have not seen the show yet and want to go in blind, please just go to the next chapter for my final thoughts. There's a number of scenes and moments that I kind of wanted to break down here. I've been trying to leave my full review vague because this show really did just open a few weeks ago, but that scene I mentioned earlier, that first transition to color, I thought was brilliantly handled and visually striking. As Betty transitions between worlds, she's kind of in front of this spiral backdrop that at first is black and white, but slowly parts of the spiral begin to get like these bursts of color. One piece of the spiral will turn blue, and then another will turn yellow, and then red, and so on and so forth until the whole thing is color. All the while, ensemble cast members start walking around in black and white costumes before slowly becoming more colorful in the costuming. It was one of the most visually striking moments I've seen in theater in quite some time. And there's a lot of ways in which they play with color in this show. The opening number for Act 2, the Where's Betty scene, made my jaw drop. They start off in colored costumes, and they all start coming on stage and they sing the song, but then they turn around to reveal a black and white side to their costumes. And then immediately the whole stage, the background, all the lighting, it becomes black and white. And then this whole number, they're singing, trying to figure out where Betty Boop is, all the while switching back and forth between black and white to color, back and forth as the background and the lighting completely changes too. And it is perfect to the beat. Not a single second of this, not a millisecond was out of sync between the actors and the background and the lighting. It works completely in sync with each other. Again, another visually striking moment. There are countless references throughout the show as well. Some of my favorite moments of this show, like the Why Look Around the Corner number, in which Dwayne is serenading Betty, and they're essentially sharing a moment together. It's a love song. And Betty mentions that there's no bouncing ball in this moment like there usually is in her world. Obviously referring to sometimes when in these old animated shorts, when there is a musical number, there could be lyrics on screen being followed around by a bouncing ball. Then in the background behind them, the moon becomes the bouncing ball and the number starts getting lyrics to it as well. And then they're just singing to the lyrics. And then a chorus kicks in, another commonality in these classic shorts, where songs are typically sung by a chorus. The whole show is just swimming in a sea of references, even at one point referencing the Hays Code during a scene where Carol, Trisha's foster mom, after being told about how Betty's cartoons involve her being chased by men, asks, "And these are supposed to be children's cartoons?" To which Betty replies, "This was before the code." And also, no, Carol, no, they were not supposed to be children's cartoons, you ignorant fool. There are some really weird story moments that I only really touched upon earlier. One of the weirdest of the bunch being that aforementioned arc of the directors. They go through this whole show pretty platonically, but by the end, suddenly they become gay lovers? I mean, I love representation on stage, but seriously? It came completely out of nowhere. Like, there was no hinting to this at all. It's kind of just silliness for the sake of silliness. Like, hey, now that everything's wrapped up, let's profess our love for one another. What's weirder and perhaps more baffling, though, would have to be the political takes that this show gets into. Keep in mind, there is a C-plot relating to a mayoral election. So yes, politics would creep its way in there, but it kind of feels like they're beating you over the head with it. I would argue this is most prevalent when Raymond, essentially changing the context of Betty's men chasing her thing in her animated shorts into a real-world context, sexually harasses her. Like I mentioned, this show doesn't age down too much. I understand what they're trying to do here, and I think it's an interesting idea to take these tropes that pertain to these Betty Boop cartoons and translate them in the real world, sometimes to creepier results. I get that, but it delves into this weird girl power C-plot that came completely out of nowhere and kind of just comes off a little preachy. They're not really saying anything particularly bold on that stage. They play it relatively safe with the feminist angle, but they really harp on it here. I think the whole harassing scene and probably the last 20 minutes of the show as a whole could have handled things a lot better, maybe given us a stronger, perhaps ballsier message if they really wanted to get political with it. I was disappointed to see them playing it safe like they did. So, final thoughts. Despite some story issues, I really can't recommend this show enough. It's pure Broadway fun, and even if it does fall apart when you think about it too much, the story is still clever and very well told, both in the writing and visually on that stage. I loved the stylistic approach this show went with the costuming and the sets, and I loved how they played with color in a way to contrast both worlds. I thought it was very cool to watch, jaw-dropping at times, and just overall extremely inventive. So with all that in mind, I'm going to give Boot the Musical a 4 out of 5. Be rest assured that you will have fun with this no matter what your age may be. There's really nothing to hate about this show unless you're already going into it with some preconceived bias. You can scoff all you want upon hearing that they're refreshing an IP like this, and rightfully so. We've seen the live-action Disney remakes. This kind of stuff gets a bad rap, but this production is justified from a creativity standpoint. So try not to look at this in the same light as a creatively and morally bankrupt Disney remake, because this is not like that at all. This is a great evening of theater, and it might just surprise you and give you something that you've never quite seen before. If you like this review, you can go ahead and give it a like. If you like me, you can go ahead and subscribe. I'm still making my way through reviewing all the shows that I saw on my recent trip to New York, so please stay tuned for that, and I will see you there. Bye!